I don't think we really need much of an introduction, but he's won a Grammy, 9 MTV Music Video Awards, 2 Brit Awards, a Tony, has sold more than 10 million records, playing to 250,000 people on Brighton Beach wasn't even his biggest audience, and most importantly, he's the reason that I live in Brighton. It's Fatboy Slim.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming to university.
Well, thanks for having me. This is my first sort of official engagement as an honorary fellow of BIMM. So this is me getting to know you, the machinations. I've accepted money for the charity I work for, Martlet's Hospice, at the end of term shows. But this is the first time I've actually been in the building, and I'm very impressed.
So what was university life like for you?
For as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a musician since I was about 8. And so everything was kind of moving in that direction for me. But there was no BIMMs when I was going through school. The only music education you could get was like a classical. So I did GCSE music for classical music, but there was nothing that taught what you lot are being taught. So I just wanted to get a degree, so I had something to fall back on. So I did a thing called British Studies, which combined humanities at Brighton University, which is what brought me to Brighton. This is how I ended up here, and I've stayed in Brighton ever since.
What was Brighton like when you were putting together those first Fatboy Slim records? What was the club scene like? What were you going to? What were you listening to? What fed into those tracks?
When I was in the House Martins, I moved up to Hull for a couple of years. And when I came back, it was just when Acid House had happened. And I came back and all my mates were wearing bandanas and going, "Get on, matey!" And acid! And I wasn't quite sure what they were on about at first. But Brighton has always had a very large proportion. I think it had the highest proportion of nightclubs per capita, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to come here. I used to go to the clubs, and that's why I wanted to go to college down here. So it was a lot based on nightclubs. It really embraced the acid house thing. But at the same time, you had Primal Scream living here, and there was this indie thing. So when the two met, when acid house and indie kind of fused, which is sort of that's where we came in, Brighton was quite rife. I mean, I take it you all live here, so you know what the city's like. It's always welcomed alternative lifestyles, cultures, sexuality, politics. And there was kind of, you had the Levelers and Primal Scream, had their little kind of, like rocky indie scene. And then there was what's now called the Arch, was called the Zap Club, and that was like a mecca for everyone south of London to come raving. So it was a sort of hotbed of that. And then, but again, it's kind of, you would walk around and there was like Robert Louis had a jazz club, and you could walk out of a jazz club and then to a disco, playing disco music, and then into an acid house club, and then into an indie club, all within about 2 streets of Brighton. And I think there was a nice cross-pollination there. And I definitely sort of thrived around just moving around.
If you were starting now, can you see a way that you would get that same influence and same spark and excitement that you got from going to those clubs at the time? How did you research music then outside of the clubs, and how would you do that, and how do you approach it now, do you think?
It's an interesting one. The word research is really interesting because there was no internet. There was not just social media. You couldn't go, even if you heard about a record, you then couldn't necessarily hear it. Someone will tell you the record's really good, and you have to just put it in your head. Like if I ever see that in a shop, and even then you couldn't always play it in the shop. So hearing stuff was way more difficult. So it was you were always trying to find stuff out. Whereas nowadays everything's at your fingertips. Now I don't really know if that's totally a good thing. I mean I get baffled when I used to make records. When I was first making like the Fatboy Slim records, I had like 2 synths, 2 drum machines, and a bag of records that I'd sampled. And that was the discipline that I worked within. And a few years later, I find myself with a laptop with a DAW, and I've got every single drum machine, every single synth, and I can Google every single record in the whole world, and they're all at my fingertips. And I was just like, don't know where to start now, really. And so I think there's such a thing as too much choice, too much information, and it just makes your mind boggle. And probably it's easier to make music if you sort of think, well, I like that groove, or I like that idea, or I'm going to base I really like that artist, so I'm going to start there and move on. Which is probably, you can still do it that way, but it must be easy to get bogged down. I mean, the good thing is that you can say you like sort of bluesy music. You can just Google the blues and you can find something you really like, and then the algorithm will tell you other people that you like, and then you can do your research and you can go down your own little wormholes, which is sort of impossible when I was your age. But because no matter what you say, every artist, they always start with what they've heard before. No artist is a blank page where they just go, I'm going to just be creative. You're always referencing the music that you grow up to or the music you really love, and sometimes you'll be basing it more directly, but even if you're not thinking about it, you're still basically regurgitating all the records that you really like. So it's a cyclical thing, and I suppose the more input you have, potentially the better the output.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. So Damien Harris, who started Skint, he told me that he would play all of these different nights, and that would make him want records that had elements of each of those. Were you DJing out in Brighton then? Were you DJing in different types of nights, or were you just playing a particular type of music?
No, I would just play it all in the same night. I've never been one for saying, this is my house set or this is my down tempo set. I would just leap around everywhere. But it was great. I mean, I used to play sort of like rare groove funk clubs, and I would sort of base it on more rare groove and funk and hip hop, but I would try and take them in a sort of acid direction. Or if I played at a house club, I would try and take them in a more sort of breakbeaty direction, So I was always trying to piss in the gene pool, really. I don't believe in saying, tonight I'll be playing this set, or tonight. I would go where the feeling and just try and sort of distort the rules as much as possible.
Can you tell us the PG-13 version of how those first Fatboy Slim records started to be made? The kind of pre-Fatboy Slim stuff that got Skint interested, and them wanting to start a label based around what Damien had been hearing.
I had a band called Beats International. Was the first big thing I did after the House Minds, and I was sort of learning with some hits but a lot of misses of what I could do with using samples, and gradually I was kind of using just more and more samples. So by the time, and then I had a band called Freak Power, where I was sort of writing it with samples, but then we were playing it live. The idea was basically that to try and make pop music with attitude out of samples and drum machines, and throwing away the musicality, but keeping the hooks, keeping the sort of pop relevance. And and by then I'd started making records at home in my bedroom, because before I would have to save up and spend money on studio time. And when you're in the studio, I don't know if you've encountered this, but when you're in the studio and the clock's on, all of a sudden your creativity can go out the window. It's like, I've only got 2 hours left, or this is costing me 600 quid an hour, but I have some good ideas. And then all of a sudden I just sort of freeze. Whereas when I wasn't paying by the hour to be in the studio, I had a setup at home by then that was good enough to actually make tunes on. Then you can just let your mind run free, and that's normally when the good stuff comes out, when you're under no pressure. So I started making home, I was in Preston Park, a little house in Preston Park by Preston Park Station, and I just had this little studio, and it just sort of became like a factory. And so at that point I had a band called Freak Power, and we used to tour a lot, and we were kind of like a sort of acid jazz band. But I was making records for two friends of mine, had a label called Loaded Records, and I started making house records for them under the name of Pizza Man. But then I was making too many records that they couldn't put out. And yeah, so this is how prolific I was at that point. I was in a band and I was writing all the songs for the band. I also had two other acts, Pizza Man and the Mighty Dubcats, and I was still making more tunes than I had acts to put them out. So Damien from Skint suggested that I address this kind of new style of music, which wasn't like house anymore. It was like what became known as big beat music. Yeah, so at that point, Fatboy Slim was just another of a succession of alter egos or pseudonyms, depending on how you look at it. And just another hobby, it's just like, I've got some other crazy ideas. Who's going to put them out? So Damien was starting a label called Skint Records. There was going to be like a non-house dance music label. And so he got me to do something, and that's what we sort of invented Fatboy Slim as just another outlet for a slightly different style of music. Not realising it was going to engulf all my other careers.
Yeah. Where were those first samples from that you kind of started building Fatboy Slim sound? So they're quite diverse, right?
I always thought the Fatboy Slim sound was. I grew up listening to the Beatles and pop music, so I liked a good hook. Then when I was 14 and just coming of age, punk rock came along, and punk rock was all about breaking rules, breaking boundaries, make it a sort of do-it-yourself ethic of you didn't go to big record companies, you just made your tunes at home cheaply. So I kept that DIY ethic. Then I got into black dance music, sort of funk and hip-hop, and that had the the break beats and the rhythm were from there. And then I was raving in acid house clubs. So basically the sound was the hooks of the Beatles, the attitude of punk rock, the rhythms of rap and funk and rap, and the energy of acid house. And that was the recipe.
So that sounds really hard to put together in a cohesive 5 minutes.
No one ever said it had to be cohesive. There's more to music than being cohesive.
That's absolutely true. So where do you stand in a kind of magpie mentality to making music versus a kind of purist side?
Oh, I'm very definitely a magpie. Yeah. I don't think I've ever. I think when I was in the House Mines, I felt stuck in a ghetto. Like even when we made that documentary, I remember somebody from the record company going, "We can't really have that bit in where you're, playing on your turntables." And it's like, why not? I said, well, because in those days there was we were kind of called indie pop. This is sort of pre-Britpop, but it's pretty much the same thing. And we called it indie pop, and kind of you either like dance music or you liked indie music. And around that time, Morrissey was singing "Hang the DJ, Hang the DJ," and there was a real animosity, which is weird because 5 years later we all got in bed together and it was all lovely. But at that moment there was a real thing of are you indie or are you dance, and that was kind of the end of me in the House Mines because there was this question of are you indie or are you dance? And I'm like, my heart is dance, and so it was. I think from that moment onwards I was like, I don't ever want to feel that I can't put out any record because it's not the genre that I was supposed to be in, or you can't mix it. I mean, I've probably, especially in the Fatboy Slim end of my career, I've delighted in breaking genres, and probably the worst magpie of them all. It's like absolutely nothing was sacred, and it used to turn me on more that people go, "You can't. That's country and western. There's banjo in that record." I'm like, yeah. So So I mean, I would call it cross pollination rather than magpie appropriation. But yeah, no, I think that one of the beauties of music in the way it brings people together is it can fuse different cultures together, and it can fuse different ideas or different, you can take one rhythm from one country and add a melody from another, and then you get this beautiful hybrid.
So just a quick question in terms of, you mentioned having like a paralysis of options in a production sense.
Oh, I like the way you put that, a paralysis of options. That's very poetic.
I think it's quite similar in terms of the live sector of DJs, especially in Brighton. There's so many clubs, so many DJs, and with the internet, it's quite difficult to get lost in that sea of. I think there's a paralysis of DJs out there. So how would you, if you were reincarnated and you're in your 20s now, how would you approach the live music scene to play in the clubs every week and stuff?
I think as long as you're not paralysed. If you're sort of paralysed by the scope of choice, if you know what it is you want to do and you think that's going to make people smile, then having a lot of options of where you do it ceases to be a problem. I think it's, the paralysis comes in the kind of your planning of what you want to project. And if you've got a groove, if you've got something that you want to do, it's you just, I don't know, you get that blinkered vision about it. If you know what it is you want to do, it's like, I want to get from here to there, and you don't get distracted. I think. I'd like to think, it's weird because my son is a DJ, and I'm watching him go through that process, and obviously it's a completely different world to when I was starting out, and things are so different with social media, and I'm learning how social media works off him. But he's got that. He knows he's got a good groove. He knows he's got a good gag, and so he's just boshing it out. And because my advice to everyone when they're starting out is just do everything. Especially as a DJ, you learn more as a DJ playing a really shit place than you do. If you go on and there's an adoring audience who just go, "Wee," then you don't really learn anything. But if you play in some wine bar and there's 15 people who didn't think they wanted to dance because it's a Tuesday night, and you manage to get them dancing by the end of the night, you've learnt some chops there, So I said to my son, just go out and just, once you know what it is you want to do, just do it as many times as possible, and every time you do it, you'll do it slightly better, or you'll refine it in some way. How to avoid the paralysis.
So obviously your sound has changed from when you started to now. Do you ever reckon that with the change of sound in music as a whole, that you will ever end up going back to your older sounds at all?
Yeah, I think there might be a time when I go, because I'm probably pretty much stuck on 4 on the floor now, rather than slower break beats, and it would be nice to go back to that. The trouble is that kind of the early Fatboy Slim stuff became such a kind of cliche. It was like when the big beat explosion happened, everybody, it sort of became, the whole idea for us was it was broke rules and genres, and it was different. And then it became the genre that it sort of became as cliched as the cliches we were trying to break. So every time I think about going back there, sometimes I think, oh God, that just sounds like a Weetabix advert. I don't know, but then part of you says, never go back. Ever in your career, never go back. Because it'll never be the same again. You can reference things or have a nostalgic night with them, but I don't think you should ever go back. There's so much more, especially now with AI and stuff like that, to go back to brutal 909s and breakbeats, probably not.
I just wanted to ask, for me, I do kind of struggle with writer's block quite a lot, and my laptop stares at me every evening, waiting for me to turn it on and get into my DAW.
I love how the whole room smiled there. Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, and it's quite, like you mentioned that you're stuck in the 4/4, and I'm finding that I'm revisiting the same patterns of a method, basically. Did you have any sort of advice in terms of how you approach a production session? Is it the same every time, or is it different every time? Or
No, I'm spoilt in the way that I don't do something unless I've got the. I don't sit down and go, right, I'm going to write something today. What I do is when I've got an idea, I was like, I better get that down. So it's not. Yeah, if I haven't got an idea, I'm not sitting there trying to get one. But whereas you probably need to more, that's your that's your main thrust right now. I think the important thing is just not to get bogged down, not to lose your confidence about it, or stop loving the process because it feels like homework. That's the thing for me. I take things on, and then halfway through, it's like, oh my god, this is it's like having homework hanging over you, and then it ceases to be joyful anymore. So it's avoiding that thing where it becomes a chore or a worry, and remembering why it was fun or why it was going to make you feel good. And if that means going outside or going, that means just leaving it and going out for a drink, or there might be an AI tool for it. It's like when you have writer's block. If you could just say, "Hey, I've got writer's block," it'll go, "Well, how about this, or this, or this?" And then you don't have. It takes it off you, and it'll generate random melodies or rhythms or lyrics, and then you just go, "Actually, that was quite good," and then that might trigger you off again. It just struck me that the AI might have just found out a way to get around writer's block, because the worst thing is, like you said, you keep just going around the same thing, going, that's all I can think of, and I'm not enjoying this because I know I should be able to think of something else. If there's something else that could sprinkle the magic dust back over you, then, but it might be AI. It might be quite good for that.
In terms of like mixing and mastering processes with your music, especially sampling, is there anything like you'd consider your unique selling points, and if so, would you be willing to kind of give them away or share your processes on certain things?
The only juicy one I've got is everyone always said, how come your drums sound so good? And basically I always had 2 drum kits. So if you're sampling a breakbeat, I'd have one breakbeat and then I'd get another drum kit to play the same pattern. It's the same as having 2 drummers on stage. And there's something about it. 2 drummers just playing the same thing just fattens it. So that's my only real sort of production trick.
You're revered as a producer and as a solo artist, as a DJ. It's all very much about you as an individual, but throughout the interview you've talked about your collaborators. Paul Heaton, you name-checked Spike, Gary, Damien. Talk to us about your philosophy on the importance of collaboration and being open to working with others.
That's a great question.
That's a very good question. Oh, you've kind of answered it. It's very important. What's interesting is when you said about collaborators, the people you mentioned, I wouldn't describe as my collaborators. They are kind of my team, which I think is a different thing. Because I have collaborated with David Byrne and Bootsy Collins, and that's what I would call a sort of collaboration. But that is vitally important, I think, to work with somebody else that you rate, who knows what they're doing, but you trust them enough. I always say it's like taking your clothes off in front of someone. It's like once you get over the embarrassment, then fun can happen. But no, all the other people talking, they're my team, and I've been over the years, and this is equally important. I think for over the years, I've met people who are solid, dependable, loyal, and great at their jobs, and I tend to try and hang on to them. So I've had the same manager since 1985. My tour manager I've worked with for 22 years. Katie, who runs my management, I've worked with for 25 years. So when I find the good ones, I kind of hang on to them. And then if you're a good team and you appreciate each other, there's a love and there's a solidarity there. And it's not a collaboration, it's like a family, which is really, really important, I think. The people you work with become an extension of you. And if you're doing something really good but working with the wrong people, then it could fall to bits. So having a good team around you, yes, is really important. And then because then they'll facilitate the collaborators. Collaborators wander in and out of your life. These people are here for the duration.
And meeting those people and starting those relationships could happen like right now. There's a room of people here to collaborate with, and in 25 years you could be like, oh yeah, these guys are my ride and die. I met them at university and they're still with me.
How do you manage to look after your well-being and mental health when you're doing hundreds of shows a year and you have to travel, plus staying up late at night, and obviously your body clock must be sometimes all over the shop? How do you manage that?
It really helps that I gave up drinking 15 years ago. I was having problems trying to maintain that kind of lifestyle. So not drinking really helps for me. But I don't know. I think as soon as you're aware of it, you start putting things in place. I've got 2 children who keep me grounded and who make sure I don't work too hard, and so I know I always have to come back to them. The sleep thing, you just do it when you can. I try not to. When I was younger and I was sort of working till 2, 3 in the morning, DJing every night, I didn't used to get up till like 11. Now I work at weekends, but I try and get up and like go to the gym and get out of bed and get myself moving during the week. Because otherwise you have that kind of student thing where you go to bed late, so you wake up late, and then because you're waking up late, you go to bed late, and it's quite easy to get at that spiral. So it's just any elements of discipline. If you do 2 things that keep you in check, you're probably going to be all right. That one was so good. You get a bonus one.
As a very, very busy person, how do you choose what you say yes and no to? Because you probably get offered and asked to do so much. How do you choose to prioritize and allocate your time?
I just follow my heart. If someone says, do you want to do this, and it sounds like it will be fun or fulfilling, then I'll say yes. And if it sounds like it would be boring, as I get older, I probably cherry pick more. But things like this, my whole association with BIMM came through having a friend called Briggy, who you probably all know. She's an old friend of mine, and one day she said, and then I came along to see the end of term shows and accept a check for Martlets, and I was just beguiled by the energy, and it made me feel good to remember when I was your age and I was just starting out, how exciting it is, and feeling. I love watching the end of the year show when you're all kind of, everyone's really nervous when they're just about to go on, and then they nail their performance and they're so elated. And it just reminds me, so yeah, and that makes me feel good, and I do stuff for charity, and that makes me feel like I have a purpose in life. And yeah, I just follow my heart. There's no real strategy in it.